Mr. Rainwater.
Hey, Jow.
I'm going to let you take this off because you were the one who suggested this topic last week. And when you did, your eyes said, I have things to say. So I'm going to let you take us there and I'm going to follow. Go for it.
Sure. I mean, I think something that every single artist starts off with, especially when they make the intention to like make stuff and put it out there, they're going to go through this moment where they're just screaming into the void. And
so explain to me what you mean by that. Because I could interpret that a dozen different ways.
Sure. There are many ways to interpret it, right? But the most obvious way to me is you're going to, you make stuff. Maybe you write a story, right? You spend months trying to write like a short story. You go over it, you edit it. Maybe you have somebody who looks over it and then you finally publish it, maybe on a blog, maybe on Substack, wherever, and maybe nobody reads it, right? This is one of the big risks of creating stuff is you're going to go through this moment where you get zero acknowledgement on what you're doing. And that can be an extremely deflating moment for most creative people because it makes them feel like what they're doing in that time is meaningless or it's pointless or it has no like relevance to the rest of the world. And granted, not everybody goes through this necessarily, but I feel like this is a pretty common experience and an experience that becomes more common as we do more stuff with the internet. Because the internet's very good at distributing stuff. It's not necessarily great at getting like everybody's attention on every single thing that's put out there.
Well, it can. You just have to pay.
You have to pay oftentimes, or you have to, understand the proper ways of networking what you're doing. And I know for myself, when me and Austin made Garage Raja, I set up a site for it. I uploaded it to the site every, 3 times a week. And there was this period of time, where maybe there were like 2 or 3 or so people reading it, but not all the time. And it wasn't really certain to me as to whether or not those were actual people or in fact, some kind of bot or whatever.
Like sending out a ping or some shit like that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, I think, a very particular thing with internet culture because there is this certain aspect of it where you have, bots, right? You have sort of fake interaction oftentimes. And then what happens, I think, for a lot of artists is they go through this, like I was saying, they go through this period where they wonder if they should keep doing it, right? And there can be a make or break point for a lot of people where they go, is this worth the effort that I'm putting into it? Is this going to be something that, I still find fulfilling a year from now or whatever? So anyway, that's kind of the general broad brush strokes of this topic from my perspective.
What prompted this, may I ask? Are you leaving the podcast? Is that what we're getting at?
No.
Because we have very low viewership. I mean, granted, we have viewership, though. I mean, but it ain't nothing crazy.
No, what prompted this is just the going through this experience again and coming at it from a different perspective.
Okay, so you're going through it right now is what you're saying. You're challenging whether or not something you're doing is worthwhile.
Right. Well, I'm challenging for myself the notion, certainly, but also just like
of what, like, may I ask?
So like, not just doing this podcast, but like I'm releasing videos on YouTube, right, on my own channel.
I've noticed they pop up in my feed every now and then. I believe you're speaking about it's not like a drink and draw. It's like
I just call it talk and draw.
Talk and draw. Excuse me. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay.
And it's the kind of thing where I'm putting it out and I'm getting back into this mode that I was with Garage Raja, where you just put stuff out, and you don't worry about it, you don't think about it, and you don't worry about the results of it.
Mm-hmm.
That that's fine on paper, but in the back of your mind, there's a certain amount of but you really are paying attention to the numbers to a certain extent.
It's impossible not to.
Yeah, it really is impossible not to. I think I'm kind of coming at it now from a different place, because I have the perspective now of okay, here I've done a thing that has big numbers attached to it. So I have some confirmation that what I'm doing isn't just screaming into the void, where it's just and I think ultimately what makes it screaming into the void is the lack of feedback, right? A lot of creative people want that feedback where they go, yes, I knew that what I was making was worth the validation that it gets, right? And that is a very tricky place, because sometimes you might have things that never really succeed like you want them to, but in your heart you're like, yeah, but that was good, that deserved attention.
Well, I mean, no, not to cut you off, but I when you gave me this topic last week, it's been on my mind all week to think about, and of course I did my research. That plenty of the world's biggest artists, fucking what's his name? The guy who cut his ear off.
Oh,
was it Van Gogh?
Yeah.
Was it Van Gogh? Or it might have been Van Gogh. I might be confusing him with someone else though. But wasn't a big deal until after he died.
Yeah.
Correct?
Right.
The same thing was with Bach, the composer, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody, he had a resurgence in the 1800s. And that's when he suddenly was a big deal. Hold on, I'm pulling up the article that I was reading, because there's so many people that were unbelievably.
It was actually more the case in the past than it is nowadays. From a numerical statistical standpoint, it was more often the case that if you're an artist, you were a nobody, and you have made a definitive decision for your life to be screaming into the void, to make paintings or whatever that, I talk about them all the time, but fucking Leonardo da Vinci, most of the stuff that he made not to be acknowledged by anybody other than himself, in a secret society of people that he had set aside, because he cryptographically wrote all of his notes backwards and was keeping stuff not to be acknowledged by the Catholic Church or all this other stuff. So he really got into it and was well, you know what? If I am going to be screaming in the void, I'm going to do the best that I can, And fortunately, he had backers in the Medici family, which were the big bankers at the time. So and that worked out for him for that reason. Not everybody has that kind of,
Yeah, that kind of life support. But you're of the mind that now, because the internet exists, that doesn't happen as much, correct?
You don't have to have the Medici to be in that kind of situation nowadays. Your Medici can be, your Patreon followers or whatever. There's more. I'm saying statistically or numerically, there's a better chance for anybody to be acknowledged as an artist than in the past, because,
yes and no. I'm going to argue you on that.
Okay.
Because yes, there is the wide distribution and the chance to go viral. You get one person who has a couple thousand followers to say, "Hey, check out this guy's art," and you're off. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, millions, if not billions, of people trying to make it in the art space all at once. So
yeah,
it's the matter. It's really a conundrum of, if you're screaming in a crowd versus screaming in the middle of an empty forest, are you making a noise? Because either way, who can fucking hear it? You know what I mean? Either nobody's around to hear it, or everybody's making noise and we can't pick out your noise. Yeah. So it really becomes that question of, is there really a difference? Now, you say that, everybody has the opportunity, and there's people that, most people don't create art these days and hide it. But we talked about this, I think, several episodes ago when we skewered George Lucas, how he's literally making movies right now and not showing them to anybody.
Right.
And when he dies, there's a chance we are going to get, like, Steven Spielberg's going to break into his vault and be like, you fuckers, you could have praised him for this. Look, he shot Star Wars 8, 9, and 10, and you guys didn't know. Here's the real ones. And we watch it and we go, wow, this is fucking brilliant. And you know what I mean? Like, he'll be appreciated after the case. Robert Rodriguez is another filmmaker who literally filmed an entire movie and then put it in a time capsule and said, yeah, we're not releasing this for 100 years.
Yeah,
100 fucking years.
I like that.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so in my opinion, it does exist, and
it does exist, but now it's a intentional choice being made versus when you're somebody starting off. Like, if you had your preference, you would want a bajillion people to see what you make initially, right?
Depends on the person.
Sure.
In my current year, like when I made Digits originally, I would have said yes, absolutely. I want everybody to see this.
Yeah. Well, and that's the only context I'm trying to speak from is from somebody who is just starting off and is younger and doesn't have the perspective.
Just starting off.
I'm talking to somebody who is, though, and that's why I want to bring this topic up, because I think
you're not working through this currently. You're not dealing with a doubt of your own work, or you're just speaking from a place of gotten through it. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from at the moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to speak at it from a place of coming through it, because I think the ultimate message that I want to get across is, like, it's gonna be all right. You'll figure it out if you stick with it, right? And
you'll end up like Edgar Allan Poe, and no one will know your work till long after you're dead, and you die drunk because your wife died.
And that is a reality, right? Like, there are the Ed Woods of the world as well, like people who are just like 100% devoted to their craft, even though their craft sucks, right? And like, they're not good at it, but they believe in themselves. And then that is also kind of a screaming into the void sort of scenario. And that's why I was thinking about that topic as a good topic, because it's, like I said, it's something that I think most people at some point or another, and usually at the beginning, go through. And that's kind of that make or break point for a lot of artists, where they decide whether or not they want to keep doing it. And you either have to become comfortable with that whole, like, process of, I'm going to make something, I'm going to put it out there, and it's probably not going to be acknowledged or anything. And that's the point. That's the place where you want to be as an artist, because that's where you're going to be at your strongest, basically, your most resilient, because it won't matter to you whether or not you get the acknowledgement. What it matters to you is whether or not you get the opportunity to create the things you want to create.
Yeah. I come at it from a point where I no longer go nuts about the interaction, the reaction, the post count, the likes. I'm coming at it from does this make me happy? Fulfillment type thing, because I mean, it's no secret. I'll tell anybody who asks, and even people who don't, like, there was a good 4 or 5 years after Digits where I was in heavy depression, like crazy depression, because Digits didn't do what I wanted it to do. I couldn't get another film off the ground to save my life. Everyone that I had worked with, in my mind, had betrayed me, abandoned me, all this and that. And I attribute it to the lack of success from Digits and my own value and this and that. Let me tell you something. I got electrocuted, burned, and I think I twisted my ankle when I shot Digits. But I kid you not when I tell you it was one of the best times of my entire life making that movie. Making movies is what gives me happiness, fulfillment, and joy. It used to be my number one. Now having fun with my son is top tier. That knocked it down a peg. But after my son, that is the one thing where I'm happy. And when I started writing Haunted, depression started slipping away. Now, granted, I was doing a lot of things. I was exercising, getting myself into a good physical space, which is important. I was getting better sleep. I was working on my diet, all that kind of jazz. Getting outside more. All those things I think were definitely contributing to getting out of depression. But the idea that I was creating, that I was working on Haunted, and there was setback after setback with getting the production off the ground, getting rejected, the script getting rejected from film festivals and this and that, and it felt like very much screaming into the void. But when I sat down at a computer and I opened up the Final Draft software and I started typing, I was happy again. And now it doesn't make a difference to me. Yeah, I think I'm happy. I find joy in people reacting to my work and wanting to talk about it, because, there is some kind of search for acknowledgement that you mentioned, that we all want that feedback and stuff. But if nobody cared, I don't think it would bother me. Like right now I'm redoing Digits, right? I'm doing a recut of Digits. I'm doing all this crazy shit to it. I'm restoring the image. It looks amazing, by the way. If you haven't
I've seen your photos that you've been putting up on Instagram. I'm excited about it.
It's very promising, and I would be the first one to naysay if I didn't think it was really going well, and it's going fucking well. I was able to recover every single piece of media, which is insane if you think about it. That was used to cut it all together. Everything down from like the screen when Charlie's looking at the Facebook and all this and that. It was a green screen thing. Sound effects that I had lost. Weird ass music that I had made. I don't know if you remember the "Suck It Bitch Suck It" song, but I remember it. I thought, with the exception of the copies of the movie, that the raw created media for that was lost to time, because I didn't think I was good at archiving stuff back in the day, but I was able to find everything. So now, now with my knowledge of things now, I am reworking things, I'm re-editing things, and again, I am having so much fun doing this. I'm proud of it. Like, I was proud of it before. It was an exhaustive process, but I was happy, I was joyful. But this is like crazy good that I am able to see it in a new light. So, I'm not to hijack the topic here, but do you remember the opening of Digits? There's an opening credit sequence, right?
It's before
it starts at the party.
Okay, because that's the scene that I'm thinking about, because that's the scene where TS spreads out the pills and says, "Let's play Heath Ledger," or I can't quite remember how the joke goes, but...
So yeah, it still starts like that. But then after that, there is an opening montage of the guys fucking around with fireworks on a playground, driving around, just doing dude shit, whatever, like high school dude shit. Stupid. After the opening montage ends, we go to the guys going to a Dairy Queen. It was supposed to be a food court, but we got kicked out of the mall. They pulled a fast one on us. They said, "Yeah, you can film here." And then we showed up and they were like, "Hey, we want money." So we had to leave, but that was another story. Anyway, but then it goes into an eating montage. So we have two montages back to back. That's way too much fucking montage. And I remember knowing it was a problem when we edited it the first time. And I was like, well, we have to have it because At no point in time back then did I think, gee, why don't I just cut the food montage into the opening montage and make one montage? And now I realize, I'm like, that's fucking obvious, and that's what I should have done, so that's what I'm going to do.
Nice.
And I'm making that work. So it's all, so like right off the bat, and one of the biggest problems I know, mostly it was well paced, but for a comedy, it was pushing 2 hours, and it shouldn't have. It should have been like a 90-minute movie. I've been able to not cut jokes or scenes or anything like that, but shorten things and kind of pick up the pace. So like there's scenes where people are just standing there quietly and there's like ambiance noise in the background, and then it cuts to the character talking, and I could have had 2 lines of dialogue laid underneath that other shot. And when you times that towards multiple times throughout a movie, you can cut 10-15 minutes out of a movie.
Oh yeah,
that's a long time.
Yeah.
So I've upped the pacing, I've shortened the runtime, I've made things more artistic. I know there's one thing that I want to try and fix that wasn't in the original. There's a setup and payoff missing. And I'm gonna try and I'm gonna have to get really creative, or I'm gonna have to try and get Kyle to come and do some ADR or some weird shit. But for the most part, I'm having a blast, to get back on point. And I'm revisiting old work that quote unquote didn't make it. I felt like I was screaming into the void when we released and didn't go anywhere. And now I'm like, well, fuck it. I'm re-editing it. I'm re-putting it out there. I'm going to submit it to film festivals that we never did before. And if it doesn't do anything, I don't care. I literally don't care. And I'm doing it for me. And if the rest of the world loves it, great. If the rest of the world doesn't care, I am no worse off than I was for the last 10 years that it sat on my hard drive doing nothing. But it's like that Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Fuck. What if somebody sees it and says, I'm not buying that movie because that movie getting distributed will end my career. But that guy knows how to write, or he's bold. He's willing to take chances, or look at the direction. He did really well. Well, whatever it may be might land me a connection or a network somewhere, or even just somebody who's just going to be a fan of Jow films and be like, wow, I'm really looking forward to Haunted. There's so many possibilities. And back in the day, like those years that I spent depressed over Digits, feeling like I screamed into a void and nothing came of it. That might have all been a waste of time. Like I could have just been fucking, you know what I mean? Like thinking about, this was a failure, when in fact it might not end up being. I was too busy. I was in a rush. I was impatient to see the art pay off. So I'm in a place now where it's like, I don't care. Love it or hate it. I don't care. I love it. I'm going to watch this movie a million times now because I'm fucking in love with it. Well, I have to because I'm re-editing it. But you know what I mean? Like the screaming into the void thing leaves you after a while, I think. Or maybe I'm just in a high point. Like, I don't know. What would you say?
Well, that's interesting, actually, that you bring that up. There's two different topics I want to hit on. And I'll start with the last thing you said first, which is that there is a certain... I do think that there is like a...
crescendo or like peaks and valley.
Yeah, there's like a pattern that artists go through where it's like, you get the initial...
I'm the best or I suck. It's hot or cold.
Well, that for sure. And then it's also like that initial moment where you're getting into the project and you're like, oh my God, everything's going to be amazing. And it's
the honeymoon. The honeymoon. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the honeymoon period. And then when you're actually in it and you're making it and you're like, oh, okay, I'm about 50% done. I still got another 50% to go. And you start to feel the inertia, right? As you start to realize all the things you need to do, all the little tasks that you need to put together and whatnot. That often becomes like there's this idea that I think I've heard a lot of programmers talk about this, where it's like, the first 90% is really easy. It's the last 10% that just drags on. Because
interesting.
That's when you're doing all the polish and you're rechecking stuff and you're making sure that everything coalesces and comes together. And that's where that's the kind of that rubber meets the road sort of moment where you make sure that, if this thing that you think is going to be really amazing, you make sure that it's amazing. But it sucks because it's like you're at the point where you're like, oh yeah, I'm done. And then you realize like, oh, I forgot about like this scene that I wanted to put in, or there's this sound effect or whatever. And you have to go back and you retouch it and you retouch it and you retouch it over and over again until you finally do that final pass and you go, okay, I can't do anything and I'm done,
Now, I would agree with you on a new project. But technically, Digits is not a new project.
Right. And this was going to get into my other subject. There is this really interesting thing that I'm kind of learning and thinking about a lot lately. And what brought it to my attention was I actually started watching The Sandman last night. And
I've heard about it. I have not watched. It's HBO Max?
Well, I watched it on Netflix. So
okay, yeah, maybe it is on Netflix. My mistake.
It's Warner Brothers, so you would think it would be on HBO Max as well. But
that's a whole that's a whole discussion.
That's a whole other can of worms.
The cancellation of Batgirl and all that kind of crazy shit. We could go hard on that.
Corporate mergers. This isn't a stock channel, so I'm not going to get into it. But
Not for nothing, though. I think we should talk about that next week. The idea that art was created and now is being withheld.
It's pretty crazy, right? It's talking about screaming into the void, right?
Yes.
$90 million movie just doesn't even get released. So anyway.
It's got Michael Keaton as the goddamn Batman.
Really?
Coming back as the goddamn Batman. And they said, nah, no one's going to go see this.
That's like that Wu-Tang album that, like, who was it? Was it Martin Shkreli?
Yeah, fucking the pharmaceutical guy bought and then he just shelved because he's a fucking troll.
Yeah. But what occurred to me when I was watching Sandman last night was that, okay, so like I read the books in art school, right? And before then, Sandman had already been out since the 80s and was kind of this, or maybe the 90s. It was like 89, 90s.
Yeah, it's in there. Yeah.
So like by the time that I was reading it, it had already been like this cornerstone of comic books for, you know, a good 10, maybe even 20 years. And from that point when I read it, right, which was in 2005, it was still like another 15 years before it ever got like a proper television adaptation. And this is Sandman's actually a pretty big title. Like it when people name big comic books, it's Watchmen, it's Sandman, and then that's kind of it. Like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore kind of dominated the space in terms of or the big prestige titles for a long, long time. And so I was looking at that, I was like, holy shit, like for Neil Gaiman, like he had to go 30 plus years to get his baby like adapted to film and TV. It was so long that like even the idea of having it put on TV now doesn't even properly transcribe because now it's on like a streaming service, right? Like, so that gave me a lot of perspective for me because I'm like, it'd be awesome to make something that gets adapted for film and television. And I'm now having this perspective of, okay, well, I got to be in it for the long haul because it could be a while. The same thing happened to Philip K. Dick with Blade Runner. Like he wrote the original story like 20, 30 years before it ever got adapted to film and television, before it became a movie, you know? And same thing with, I mean, he died before he could ever see an adaptation of Man in the High Castle. So like there is a certain, if you're going to be an artist, you have to have a certain perspective where you're willing to look at it on a long-term vision, you know? And then that also sort of acts as like, okay, I'm not screaming into the void. It's just, or I'm not even screaming into the crowd. The crowd just isn't paying attention to what I'm doing yet. And it's just, you got to give time, a willingness to play itself out. Good.
Can I ask a question that may come off offensive to you?
Go for it.
Or it might be kind of condescending, but it's not intended to be. It's not intended to be. I'm asking this as a legitimate question because I'm curious, just based off of what you just said. Are you / most and or all comic book artists want to be filmmakers but don't want to do it or are afraid to do it? Or
yes.
Because you basically
yes.
you basically just put filmmaking adaptations as the crown jewel of accomplishment for some kind of sequential work or, like a narrative work. Like, I would think that for you guys, like a fucking crown jewel would be, hey, this movie got adapted to a comic book. Congratulations, movie. You know what I'm saying? Like vice versa. Like I would think that you would hold your art form as the crown jewel.
No,
but you're talking as though the film adaptation is actually something to strive for. So I'm curious to know, like, is that really what you want to do and you just suffice for comics because of reasons? I'm legitimately curious.
No, that can often be the case. Like I definitely know that when I was drawing Trailer Park Warlock, I was thinking about a lot of those scenes as like,
cinematically.
As like if this were an animated series or whatever. But I am too lazy to actually do that myself, right? Like I could,
like animate or like live action.
Yeah, to animate a whole episode, right?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Like in order for me to have it happen the way that I would want, it would take forever to do, and I'd rather just make the story, right? Like it's like it's one of those things where I make where I made a compromise for myself, where it's like I would rather this if I had my druthers, this would be like an animated thing or a video game, but I'm doing it as a comic book because I'm more interested in having the story completed.
It's more feasible at the moment.
It's way more feasible for me to do solo. Absolutely. This is the thing about comics that I really like, is that one person can create an entire world and have it completed in a relatively timely manner. And you can do that with prose, but prose is harder to get immersed into.
Sure.
It's very difficult to do it on your own with animation. I've seen one example so far that goes against that, which is the Big Les show. And then like with film, like if you're doing live action, you have to have a team. There's no other unless you want to Neil Brain it. Like that's the only exception.
I kind of Neil Brained it on Digits. We had one other. It was me and one other person for crew. Shout out Don Skoronsky.
That's still one more person than Neil Brain.
I mean, Don really didn't. I'm not diminishing Don's role. He was essential to making the movie. He played Angel. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, he held the boom mic. Now, Don is not a experienced or trained boom operator. Mm-hmm. He was just the guy who was willing to help me out because he had a little bit of tech background. Now, if I'm not moving a camera, I can literally hook the end of my microphone at the end of a C-stand gobo arm, and like I will be running the audio. Like I don't need to worry about having a boom up on stage. So I don't want to say Don was useless, but if I was smarter, I wouldn't have needed Don, and it would have just been me. And if I have my way, that'll be the fucking way it goes unhaunted again. So, like, as a general rule, I want control. Like, I cannot, like, the bliss that you have as a sequential artist is the same bliss that I have as a screenwriter.
For sure.
Fucking everybody else is out of the picture.
In a certain way, it's difficult. I don't know. On a certain extent, you are correct that a lot of comic book artists and writers kind of look at comic books as screenwriting, right? Okay. Or as like storyboarding to a certain extent.
They're definitely cousins. I mean,
they're very much cousins. And and it's also why there is such an easy sort of synergy between the two, where you get a lot of comic book adaptations to stuff.
Sure.
And I would definitely argue there are strengths to comic books that are standalone strengths that you can't do in filmmaking, but in terms of attention and money, right, which everybody on some level likes, you gravitate towards filmmaking. And it's the same thing, and it's the reason why I brought up the whole thing with Sandman. It's like, I'm sure that when Neil Gaiman originally wrote Sandman, like, he would have loved to have seen like a TV show happen or whatever much earlier than it did, because he wanted to share those ideas with bigger audiences. And comic books have always had sort of a niche audience, in the sense that people who read comic books tend to be comic book nerds. Now that's changed a lot, right? Like that's changed a lot from the 80s to now, where you can like, kids are getting comic books available to them, at school through like Scholastic book sales and all that stuff. But like to a certain extent, it is, and the same thing goes with prose writing. It is one of those things where people always want to see it elaborated more. You know what I mean? Like there's something about both of those forms where we can't help but in our minds kind of think, well, what would that look like though on like if we got like a big budget, if somebody, some big name director directed it or whatever. I feel like on a certain level, we can't help ourselves to kind of wonder. And so that curiosity always seems to make its way, to where you have adaptations like Game of Thrones or.
Well, he wrote that as exactly what you're talking about. Game of Thrones was written because he just wanted to make a TV show, but he couldn't get it off the ground as a fantasy TV show. Nobody was interested, so he wrote it as books. And when the books took off, and he knew that somebody was gonna want to make an adaptation of it.
Yeah,
he ain't ever finishing in that last book. It ain't fucking happening. Like, the fucking TV show ended, right? And I'm assuming they mostly did what he outlined for them what would probably happen. And, he shot his wad, so to speak. Yeah. Where it's like, all right, why do I even gotta, like, there's people that are like, no, give us the fucking book. We want the book.
No, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because that actually illustrates sort of the difference between attitudes towards prose and how it's evolved. Because you look at Game of Thrones versus something like Lord of the Rings. Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings without any expectation of like, oh yeah, one of these days it's going to be a film, like
right.
He was just writing it, and
he wrote it in the 1930s, right?
It was before 1930s. It was a little bit right after World War One.
Oh, right. So 1920s.
It's probably 1920s ish,
Okay.
So
yeah, there wasn't big on. Well, I mean, granted, they were doing a lot of adaptations to start, like Dracula, Frankenstein, shit like that.
It's not like there wasn't film in existence, but I think film at that time probably had a similar, I don't know, like recognition in the same way that like people recognize video games right up until the last decade, where people are like, video games is one of those things that, younger people are into. I don't know if it'll ever take off.
It was dismissed. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And
you think the fantasy genre was one of those things where it was just like, oh, elves and magic and shit, sorcerers?
Hell yeah. When Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, that was a niche audience for a long time and didn't take off until the 60s.
It's crazy to think that people were into vampires and zombies like Frankenstein, you know what I mean? Like, over a wizard. Like,
yeah, but I mean,
it's not much different.
I think I would argue though, like I'm taking this particularly from Bram Stoker. The way he wrote that book, it feels extremely believable, and you're never like in this place where you think this is another world. You think this is happening the day in which it was written. Whereas with Tolkien, it's like, here's another world that you just have to use your imagination and believe about hobbits and stuff. Like plus such
production value and all that kind of jazz factors into a lot of stuff. Like, or not value, production cost.
Oh, you're talking about in regards to film? Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I mean,
of it being adapted, you know what I mean? Like those things do. So like, if somebody's looking at two different comic books and one of them is, I don't know, The Green Mile, and the other one is Trailer Park Warlock, they're going to look at it and go, well, Green Mile, what do we need? A prison? A couple of guys?
Yeah.
A mouse?
There's
not a cost applied there. Yeah. Whereas Trailer Park Warlock, they're going to be like, all right, we need to do vis effects. We're going to need to do rehearsal. You know what I mean? Like all that kind of stuff gets factored in.
There's fewer degrees of suspension of disbelief. And so I think that is for a long time, and probably still even today, has been sort of this numeric by which, producers and et cetera look at it as an investment risk. Like the greater of degrees. Yeah.
The only thing that doesn't get the only thing that does get greenlit these days is existing IPs, brand recognition. Yeah. That's the reason why you get reboots. And a lot of people say, well, why don't they just, do a remake of movies that were shitty but poorly executed? Well, the problem is that the cultural awareness does not exist for those properties, so that becomes a risk again. So what they don't want to risk their money. It's like if you went to the craps table and they said, well, you can roll the dice, and if you usually, like the last couple of days, it's been rolling 12 a lot. But if you guess another number, you might win bigger. Somebody's like, well, I'm guaranteed to win at least a little bit if I guess 12. So 12. And that's how they play the game, which
for sure,
from an art standpoint, fucking blows.
Right.
From business standpoint, duh.
Yeah, like from a business standpoint, it totally makes sense. And as an artist, you sort of have to. This is the perspective that I take on it: is that you just have to basically take it in good faith that the dice changes what it's going to roll in time. But you really have to think about it as in time, as in a lot of time, you know.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is taking risks by yourself as the artist.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of another way to properly do it, because if you're taking risks and you're having to put other people's sort of integrity or whatever on the line, it really becomes like a burden basically to you, and it becomes a burden to them, and it makes it way less enjoyable, right? Like,
sure.
So going back to the whole notion of screaming into the void, I think that's the kind of the point I want to say is like there are a lot of different ways that you can both acknowledge it and then also, for lack of a better word, combat it, you know, where you can either say like, look, I enjoy making this, I'm not going to worry about how people receive it. Or you can also say, it's just I just have to let time do what it's going to do.
Yep.
You know, I understand the trends that are happening right now. These aren't going to be the trends for forever. Reboots are not going to be the trend for forever. They come and go. It's a cyclical thing. You go back to the 90s, there were people who were rebooting stuff from the 60s. Like, there are so many movies that were just like television shows from the 60s. Yeah. That was the trend. And then now it's like people are rebooting a lot of stuff that was popular in the 80s because, you know, millennials grew up on that stuff from the 80s and they want to make money off of millennials. Or
because even if you hate it, you're still going to go see it.
Yeah.
Even if you hate it before seeing it. That's the thing. For example, there is no way in fucking hell, especially you and me, we're definitely doing an episode about this, that people are not going to watch The Munsters.
Yeah. Right.
There's no way we're not watching this movie because of the train wreck that was that trailer. But before then, everybody said, oh, Rob Zombie's making a quirky comedy movie about a 60s TV show. What? Like,
have I talked to you about, I have a theory, which is that this is actually the new means of promotion in cinema, because this works so well for Sonic the Hedgehog, where the initial reveal of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie was like, people are like, what the hell are y'all doing? Y'all are going to destroy this thing. And they're like, oh, well, we fixed it up. And then everybody was on board. So I think that this is almost like a means by which studios grab attention by saying like, by giving people the impression they're going to screw it up, and then last minute, you know, like, oh, well,
catering to the fans, where it's like, hey, you made a difference, so suddenly they're invested in it. Like, hey, we made change, so we can support it now.
Yep, exactly.
I don't know.
We'll see. It's to be determined with the Munsters. You know,
what you're saying makes sense.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was contrived that way with Sonic. I don't believe it's that idea behind the Munsters. I think you're giving too much credit
probably
to the studios to think that that's a way to go, because to be honest with you, that's too smart for them.
Well, and I'm not necessarily saying they planned that from the very beginning with Sonic. I am saying like they might have been like, oh, we have a disaster on our hands. We need to fix this up fast. How can we pivot this to work in our favor? And
I think they did do that. I'm not disputing that. But what I'm saying is I don't think they're going to use that as plan of action going forward with things. I
don't have enough examples right now to make this, solid, right? This isn't like the Inception horn where you're like 10 years in and trailers are still using the Inception horn, you know?
Yeah, but we have to watch and see what happens. I'm of the mind that Rob Zombie tried to make a movie, or this is a tax write-off thing, or maybe he had like one more film left on like a contract that he signed, and he was just trying to get it fucking done so he can be, out the door. I'm still watching. It's gonna be a train wreck.
That's the thing, right?
I'm gonna have a couple of shots of whiskey before I sit down and start it. But like, there's no way I'm not watching it. Like, it's intriguing to me, which is the same thing now. So here's going back to it. Wow, we do get to talk about it. It kind of it did enter my mind before you even said this. A couple of days ago, it did enter my mind whether or not the shelving / cancellation of Batgirl was a PR move to get people to want to watch it more.
Oh yeah, how could it not? You immediately add more value to something by saying you can't have it. Like,
yes, right.
That is supply and demand at its like most basic. Yeah. Yep. And so like sooner or later, it could be a year from now. Who knows? Like, Warner Brothers.
We'll get to see that movie in some shape or form. I mean, we got to see the fucking Snyder cut. Like,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a changing of the guard there, and it's unprecedented for this to happen. But it's new ground in Hollywood territory to try this. Whether they shelve it and it's just a tax write-off and we never actually get to see it, I doubt that's the case. Or if this is a PR move where, like how you talked about, if they're sonicking this, where they're saying
nobody
it was so badly.
Talking about the Batgirl movie until it was canceled. I didn't know there was a Batgirl movie that Michael Keaton was going to appear in until you just told me. And none of us knew about this until they canceled it. So
there's not even a trailer for it, though. You know what I mean?
I think this is just, they're like, well, this is cheaper than a trailer. Like,
true. It's true. And that could be very well the case. We might turn around and they might be like, hey, guess what? Here's that fucking movie after all. And we all tune in to see it.
The reason I'm bringing this up is something that I've been thinking about and kind of blew my mind. Tesla has spent $0 on advertising. None.
Really?
Their main advertising is Elon Musk going on Twitter and causing controversy in like pretend buying Twitter and all this stuff.
Yeah.
That is what has been the advertisement for Tesla, is the CEO. And they have spent $0 doing it.
What is that? What's that? The phrase, any press is good press.
Yeah. So like on a certain level, I'm like, wow, that's kind of genius, because I don't know how much of this was intentional or whatnot, but like,
oh, he's very calculated. I think Elon knows what he's doing.
Like when you go, oh, okay, I can just be the advertising budget for this, which costs me nothing.
Right.
Like, how much money was saved doing that? Like, and this is after going for years where that company was in the hole for a long, long time. And so I think about that and like, this is advertising in our new era.
Yeah.
Is you create a story, and then people either love or hate that story. It doesn't actually matter whether or not they love or hate it. It's that they transmit it. It's that they talk about it. And then that's what creates the commerce.
This is a big thing in professional wrestling.
Yeah.
So I know you're aware of a guy named John Cena.
Yep.
And John Cena, so in wrestling, there's a thing, there's two types of things. There's good guys and bad guys. They're called faces and heels, right? Faces are the good guys, heels are the bad guys. John Cena was a heel when he did like his rap persona thing. And then he turned into a face, which is a good guy. And he was Mr. Hustle, Loyalty, Respect. He was champion for the kids. He was like the Superman of WWE. And he never wanted to turn heel again. And the more adult fans don't like that. They like the heels. They're a little bit more jaded, cynical. They like the good bad guys, the antagonists, right? So all of a sudden, the little kids would start chanting, "Let's go Cena," during a match. And all of the adults, men, would chant, "Cena sucks." Kids and girls, "Let's go Cena." Adult men, "Cena sucks." And they would duel these chants constantly. The man's merch went to #1 and stayed there the rest of his career.
Yeah.
And the entire place was split on him. And then that became the kind of status quo for wrestling. It was like, it doesn't matter if they boo you. It doesn't matter if they cheer you. It matters if they make noise. If there's crickets when you walk out to your theme music and nobody cares, then you have a problem.
Yeah.
So bringing that back around to the screaming into the void thing, I think it's very important for artists to look at their work objectively and say, is no one really understanding this? Or am I not understanding my audience?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes you can be screaming into the void and people are like, yeah, I know this. Like, I don't need to hear this. I don't need to see this art because I know where that's going to go. There's reasons why. And I think part of screaming into the void is self-evaluation upon the artist. So you have to look at it and say, is there interest in this? Why is there interest in it? Why is there not interest in it? The other day, like, I've been posting screenshots from digits for the last 10 years, every now and then, here and there. Minimal interaction. And I'm talking, sometimes it'll just go, I'll see the little Facebook stats. It's like 276 people saw this post, 0 likes. Like, nobody gave a shit.
Yeah.
Then I posted the comparison thing of the restoration. All of a sudden, I've got like a 28% response rate, which is great. If anybody knows anything about marketing, 28% is fucking insane. That's a great return on a advertisement. And it keeps going. Every time I post a thing, people are interested. Now, I don't know necessarily if it's the comparison shots that are drawing them in or the new information that I keep putting out, that we're putting it in festivals, that we're redoing sound, that we're doing it in 4K. I don't know what they're actually reacting to.
Right.
But they are consistently reacting. And what I'm taking away from it is they're interested. So I should, and I have used that momentum to keep going. I've gotten more done on this project of restoring the film in the last 5 days since I posted the thing than the last 2 weeks that I started it, because I got interaction. So it's definitely, important to get interaction and stuff. I guess I'm talking as
it can be a really important
now, so
that kind of feedback cycle can be really great for artists. 100%.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I've noticed that I tend to get a little more like slower and depressive, not like majorly depressive, but I just like, I'm a little more melancholy on my off seasons when I'm not releasing episodes, but I'm working on episodes, because I'm not having nearly as much interaction with my audience. So like, I'm just like, I'm kind of back into that previous trauma, for lack of a better word, of screaming into the void. We're like, oh, I'm screaming back into the void again, And so like, I made a pretty, I'll be doing this again. I'll be doing this more in the future, where I just like kind of create pictures or stuff from Trailer Park Warlick that I put up on Instagram or whatever to kind of get feedback, interaction from people, just so I know that there are people out there who are into it. And I have confirmation for myself, like, okay, yeah, this is still a thing that people want to talk about, or interested, or thinking about. Because ultimately artists are kind of, we want that validation. We want that attention. We want that acknowledgement,
I think,
I think it's what it is.
I think, and this is an important life lesson, kids, there's a balance.
Yep.
You as the creator need to not become dependent on that. You can use it. It's like a drug.
Yeah.
You can use it to kind of spur some inspiration and stuff. But if you start becoming reliant on it, I need that fix. Give me that attention. You're going to stop creating. You're going to, you know what I mean? You're going to be more response driven as opposed to, or you're going to be more reactionary as opposed to actionary. Yeah. And that's not what you want. So there's definitely a delicate balance that needs to be struck for that. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to understand. Like me right now, I noticed today when I posted that picture, another comparison from the restoration of digits, I was like, all right, I'm doing this too much now. I've posted pictures the last 3 days and the likes and stuff have been consistent. But if I keep doing this, I'm going to wear out my welcome with my audience. I need to understand that sometimes less is more. Sometimes you need to kind of hold things back from your audience because and this is a very important quote that I learned from Chris O'Donnell when they interviewed him about Batman and Robin and how fast it came out after Batman Forever. And he said, and I quote, "These things have to go away for a while." In other words, and so that way when they come back, they're special.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for an artist to understand, is that when you're out and you're doing your thing and you've got it out there, live it up while you can, but also draw a line in the sand for yourself and then step back. People are going to tell you, like, that don't understand that. People that aren't in the artist world. Like, what are you doing? Keep going. Keep the momentum up. Keep the awareness going. Keep the brand alive. Shit like that. No, step back. Because it's kind of like The Rock. Remember when The Rock got really great at acting suddenly after being in The Scorpion King and Doom? He suddenly found his stride. And then suddenly every fucking movie had The Rock, and I was like, I'm done. The Rock is not an appeal to me anymore. I've gotten too much of it. It's like when you eat too much cotton candy. It's like, it was good to start, but I think I'm gonna puke now. That to me is the response. Do you know what I mean? Not the void. What's the opposite of the void? The
crowd is actually, I think, a pretty good
Yeah, we can't live in the crowd. We have to visit. That's going to be what we have to Airbnb with the crowd. We're there for a short while and then we're out, because artists need to find that balance. It is important for us to go into the void.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it is important for us to understand things that normal people don't think about, to get that introspection and then illuminate it, and then it will strike those chords. And if we don't go into that void, if we live amongst the crowd, we're not going to find it. It's too busy. It's too distracting. It's too cluttered. You know what I mean? It's chaos. Like, we need to step away. So I think there is benefit in the void. And I think there's benefit in the crowd. And I think the end all lesson that I would say at the end of this podcast is balance. Finding that balance of knowing that the void is okay.
It absolutely is.
I'll leave it at that.
And you might even find yourself missing it at a certain point, you know.
That's true.
So yeah, I'll leave it at that too.
Sending you guys back into the void. Good night.